How y'all doing? So I want to do this video because Kevin Sullivan is like one of the most key players of the entire Benoit situation that has never done a publicly televised complete interview. And he really still hasn't done it. Like he really missed his opportunity. But Jim Cornette really wanted to know four things. One, why didn't Kevin Sullivan participate in the Dark Side of the Ring? Two, did Kevin Sullivan ever hit Nancy? Three, what was his relationship with Nancy? And four, what was his relationship with Chris? And all of this, I'm going to stick to those four questions. Number one, he did not do the Dark Side of the Ring segment because there are sensitive issues that he did not want to bring up without Nancy's family's permission. Nancy and Kevin Sullivan were married for a really long time. They were married for 13 years. There's a lot of things that he knows about Nancy that that he could have brought up in order to defend himself, but he says that it really wouldn't have done him any good, and he didn't want to do that without having that confirmation from her parents that it would be okay because her parents are still alive. So that's why he didn't want to do the Dark Side of the Ring segment. And because the producers for Dark Side of the Ring didn't want to get in contact with Nancy's family and get confirmation that it was okay for him to talk about these things. And because they didn't do it, he chose not to talk to them. And I guess, and it's kind of a rule of life that if you don't speak for yourself, other people will speak for you. And we see that a lot of people decided they was going to speak on behalf of Kevin Sullivan in that documentary. Okay, number two, what was his relationship with Nancy? Now this is where we started talking about where he initially met Nancy. So he met Nancy doing photo shoots for Florida Championship Wrestling, and they became friends. She was a wrestling fan. They became friends. Over time, they just kind of grew into being lovers. He was 32, she was 21, and married to someone else. Over the course of time, of them working together, they just kind of fell in love, and they got married in 1992, and they were married from 1992 till 1997. Okay, so we learned about the Birth of the Fallen Angel character, which was apparently all Nancy's idea. Kevin Sullivan obviously brought her into Florida Championship Wrestling, but she picked out all of her own gear. She picked out all of her own her gimmicks, like when she was carrying the snake and all that type of stuff. That was really her idea. And he's talked about their divorce. He said now they were living separate lives. Essentially, Kevin Sullivan had two properties, and he was living in one of those properties. She was living in another one of those properties, and that's how it was when before the angle with Chris Benoit began. So it wasn't like they were living together. They weren't, happily ever after until Chris Benoit came along and stole his wife. They were already separated. Okay, now the reasons for this is he said they just basically grew apart. That Nancy was really young when she got married, and well, this was her second marriage, by the way. But she was really young, and she wanted to be independent. She wanted to do her own thing, and not be under his wing all the time. And he believed that when he was booking this angle, that Chris Benoit was a guy who was worried about. Chris Benoit was married at the time as well. He had a pregnant wife, and he said that Chris Benoit was worried about how it would look to his wife to see him cuddle up with some other woman on TV, and he really hesitated to do the angle. So he didn't believe in his mind at all that anything was going to happen between Chris Benoit and Nancy. So that's why he didn't have a problem with Chris Benoit and Nancy doing the storyline together, because Benoit was married, and even though Nancy and he was not living together, Benoit was married with a kid coming. Well, I'm guessing would have been either David or his sister. Okay, so his relationship with Chris Benoit. Essentially, he says the same things about Chris Benoit that he says about everybody says about Chris Benoit. He was a hardworking guy. He was quiet, kept to himself. He talked about he really got to know Chris Benoit in 1995. He knew Benoit in 93 because Benoit came through WCW, but he really got to know him in 1995. And he said he worked with him very closely because Benoit worked a very Japanese style, and he wanted Benoit to learn a more American style. And he said that the potential was there, and Benoit was willing to put in the work and the effort. And he called him a diamond in the rough and said that he was, just this great performer, and he really just enjoyed working with him and polishing him up. But he said he didn't have any problems with Chris Benoit on a personal level. Okay, so they start talking about the domestic issues. He denied ever hitting Nancy. He says that if the Dark Side of the Ring producers had done their research, they would have found that the only domestic dispute between Kevin Sullivan and Nancy Toffoloni is when Nancy was arrested for attacking him with a knife. And Jim Cornette was able to find this information in a People magazine, believe it or not. I also found that same People magazine, but and of course it says the charges were dropped, and this took place in 1997, which means it took place prior to the divorce, or around the same time as the divorce. I was not able to independently verify this. I could not find a mugshot. I could not find an arrest sheet or anything like that. So I'm sorry, but we're just going to have to take People magazine as an authority on this. I really don't want to because it's tabloid. But Kevin Sullivan said that it's true, that it happened, that he bailed her out 3 days later under a promise that she would never do it again. And they were already living separately anyway. And that was and he said out of respect for her family, he didn't want to bring this up in the documentary as a counterpoint to Sandra saying that he abused Nancy. So it is a lose-lose situation if you're a guy, and especially if you're a tough guy or a wrestler or something like that. It's hard for people to believe that you are a victim of domestic violence. It's easier to believe that you actually were the person abusing other people. So I feel him on that. I kind of understand it. I still think, again, if you don't speak for yourself, other people will speak for you. So he says, Kevin Sullivan also says that he never met the wives of Eddie Guerrero or Dean Malenko. He doesn't know either one of those women. So he doesn't know whether they know anything they know about him is secondhand, which of course is obviously true. So he also starts talking about the Bash at the Beach incident. So Sandra Toffoloni in the documentary says that Benoit and Kevin Sullivan get a little stiff, and they start throwing some serious, real punches in this match, and it ended up being with a fight in the back, and with Chris Benoit biting Kevin Sullivan. So Sullivan says that basically he was working a stiffer style at the time, and that he had begun working stiff, and this storyline is just one of those storylines where he was working stiff, and that he told Chris Benoit to bite him because he wanted to tap into the Tyson Holyfield situation that had taken place. So they independently checked Brian Last. He did the independently checked the time frame, and Tyson Holyfield took place June 28th, 1997, and Bash at the Beach took place July 13th, 1997. So it's pretty true. It's close either anyway. That Kevin Sullivan was just recreating the Tyson Holyfield storyline, and Sandra just got worked. She basically believed a storyline was real, and that's just kind of how it is. Sandra is not the person in the business, So he talked about that, and so another thing that he talked about was the relationship after the affair. So essentially, as we all know as wrestling fans, that the four guys, the radicals that they was called in WWE, Malenko, Saturn, Benoit, and Guerrero, they wanted out of their WCW contracts. Kevin Sullivan was the booker at the time, and he was trying to get the guys to stay. So what he decided to do was he was going to basically he was going to do the right thing. He was going to give these guys the pushes that they deserved. So he said that's why he gave Chris Benoit the World Heavyweight title, to show him that there was no hard feelings. They actually went into a cool story about him telling Sid about it, and Sid basically just saying he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to submit to Benoit and give Benoit the title. but he had to talk Sid into doing it. That was really cool. He talked about he wanted to make Saturn and Malenko the tag team champions, and then he wanted to make Chris Benoit. I mean, not Chris Benoit, but Eddie Guerrero the United States champion. Even though Chris Benoit, I mean, Eddie, I keep getting these two guys mixed up. Even though Eddie Guerrero had already been the U.S. champion before, but he was talking about, he wanted to make Eddie Guerrero sort of the U.S. champion, just to show those four guys that there was no hard feelings over the whole situation. But then apparently something something tore that apart. What happened was Mike Graham, who was a friend of Kevin Sullivan's from his days in Florida. Uh, Mike Graham, I think his dad used to run the Florida territory. So there's just some old school buddy, and Mike Graham was actually hired by Eric Bischoff to WCW. So Mike Graham approached Chris Benoit apparently, and he says to Chris Benoit, "If you had done to me what you did to Kevin, I would have cut your fucking head off and put it on a stake." And because Mike Graham said this, Benoit said, "I'm out of here," and everyone says, when Benoit says he's out of here, everyone else essentially just says, "I'm out of here." And because Eddie Guerrero had gotten into arguments with Eric Bischoff and all that type of stuff, so they wanted out. They started making outrageous demands, like they wanted J.J. Dillon fired for reasons I don't know. They wanted Mike Graham fired for what he said about Chris Benoit, and they wanted Kevin Sullivan fired because they just didn't trust him after the whole Nancy thing. They just didn't trust him. None of that happened, of course, and, and essentially WCW gave them their releases. But then he also told the interesting story of that it was supposed to be 6 guys that were supposed to leave. And this is why Kevin Sullivan was trying to placate them so much. He didn't want to lose 6 talents because in addition to Malenko, Saturn, Guerrero, and Benoit, Conan and Shane Douglas were also supposed to leave. Now Conan backed out. I don't know why. So what? Anyway. Because Conan was washed by this time. But the WWF did not want Shane Douglas. And Jim Cornette openly laughs and says that he remembers Vince McMahon rolling his eyes at the prospect of signing Shane Douglas again. And that the WWF had no interest in Shane Douglas. So they got the 4 guys that they wanted. And Sullivan tried to build trust with these guys, and it just did not work. And they remained professional. But he had no personal connection to Nancy or Chris after the divorce, and after Chris Benoit left WCW, he did not have any contact with them. Okay, so that's essentially it. He didn't have any knowledge or any information on the murders. The conspiracy theories that he had anything to do with the murders, he said, are just people believing his gimmick, which he says is very well researched, and he basically learned his craft as far as the Satanism and the Luciferianism and all that type of stuff that he was doing, and that it's not a shoot, it's not legit, and he just did his research, and people need to stop blaming him for what's going on. Which, yeah, I mean, come on, man. You got to stop doing that stuff. I wish I could independently verify the Nancy Benoit or the Nancy Toffaloni and Nancy Deuce or whatever assault of Kevin Kevin Sullivan, but I can't, and it's unfortunate. So hopefully this clears up, or this just gets Kevin Sullivan's side of the story on record, that they were people like everyone else. They were happy for a while, and then they weren't. And they were living separately, and there was no abuse, and there might have been some arguments, but there was no fighting. He didn't give her a black eye. The story and what Kevin Sullivan says about the knife. Kevin Sullivan says he was stabbed. The story, the People magazine story, claimed that she admitted to brandishing a knife. That maybe she waved a knife. But whatever the case may be, that was in 1997. It had nothing to do with 2007. So it was an interesting interview. It was fun listening to Kevin Sullivan because he has so much wrestling knowledge. Talk about wrestling. It was really good. I'll put I'll link it in the box below if you're interested in seeing it. And if you haven't sat down and listened to it, and you interested, it's like an hour and a half. So it's really fun. And yeah, thank you guys, and I'll talk to you guys later. This is my hot tag segment. This is essentially the story after the story. So basically, if I find some information out after I do a video or after I record the vocals for a video, I just do what's called the hot tag, which is essentially I tack something on at the end that you guys might find interesting. So here's something that I found that was really interesting that I have never heard discussed anywhere, and that is that Hustler magazine published some nude photographs of Nancy Benoit after her death. This is absolutely insane. So apparently, what happens is after Nancy dies, uh, Hustler magazine decides that they're going to post some racy videos. Well, they had some videos that apparently they were made years prior, like 24 years prior. So if it was 2000, it might have been 1993 where she did this video, and they kept the picture. They kept this video. They never used it. So essentially, what happened is after she died, they went through the archives, found these pictures, and started posting them. And they were immediately sued by Maureen Toffoloni, who was the mother of uh, woman Nancy Benoit, and the court threw it out. The court said that Hustler magazine had every right to publish those photos, and there was nothing that Maureen could do. That's nuts. But let's read one of the stories. So it says, justices won't reinstate award against Hustler mag. This is from Qatar News, Qatar.com. So the Supreme Court won't reinstate an award against a racy magazine in dispute over nude pictures of a model published after she was killed by her professional wrestler husband. The story turned away a request by the family of Nancy Toffoloni Benoit to reinstate a jury's decision to make Hustler magazine pay them almost $20 million. The magazine published the photos after she and her son were killed in 2007 by wrestler Chris Benoit. Benoit's family said Nancy never gave permission to publish the 24-year-old photos, while the magazine said it could print them because they were newsworthy. The jury's 2011 decision to penalize the magazine $19.6 million was later reduced to $250,000. The award was then thrown out by the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. So they did win money, and then it was thrown out. Then it was reduced, then it was thrown out. So this is crazy. Like, I've never heard of this before, and no one ever talks about this. And I figured somebody might be interested, but I'm not making a separate video just to talk about, Hustler posting nudie pictures of Nancy. But this is grotesque. This is absolutely I forget what you would call it, but this is grotesque for and look, man, is it right or is it wrong? It's tasteless as fuck, It's not illegal, I remember when well, I'm not even gonna go into that, but the pictures aren't even that bad, You don't see her naughty bits or anything like that. So, the picture that I saw was not that bad. There was a picture that was involved with the story. I'm not going to post it, because it was like, if it was tasteless for them to post it, it's tasteless for me to post it. So I'm not going to post it, but I will say, it wasn't that bad. Not that the still picture that I saw wasn't that bad. Now, if there's more to it than that, then that's unfortunate. Okay, so let's see. So there you have it. That's your hot tag segment for this video. Thank you guys for listening again. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.